What you're seeing on the screen right now is how Mexican identity was shaped during the past of the years. In this video, we are going to talk specifically about the Prehispanic and Spanish colonialism period, which are in green color and in yellow color. You will also see through these timelines how social movements or politicals were developed, and also how the artistic movements represent this period of time. Also, we will know a little more about what was happening in our surroundings, like in worldwide, to kind of consider how these type of culture match with the rest of the world that nowadays is very globalized, right? My name is Miranda Quero, and let's start. We will first begin. I make it easier for you. I put like in clear colors, like in more light colors, which are the aspects that are more important during this timeline. If you want to check the complete one, it will be like in a link down here in the description. But let's begin. Olmec civilization is how literally everything begins. Olmec civilization, as you can see here, is known as the mother culture of Mesoamerica. It was this culture that started to establish communities all along the Gulf Coast, and it will be like the main establishment where people in the future time will start like develop different type of civilization or groups. Because even though we are talking about Mexican identity, it is important to know that they exist like a lot of little groups that had their own identity that were also represented in their art. We will see it soon. One of the most important cultures we can find here is like the founding of Tenochtitlan. In finding of Tenochtitlan, we can find that it was found like in the Lake of Texcoco, like the Aztec Empire. It is now where it settled Mexico City, and it was the beginning of everything. This Tenochtitlan was very powerful and important, and there were like in these little groups I'm talking to you about, like these little civilizations, they were formation of the triple alliances that were kind of the biggest groups that had control of the area of the zone, and even like little groups had to pay some tribute to them in order, like, I don't know, for survive or for start like keep establishing like their economical routine, covering their needs, etc. So here we can say like this Aztec Empire had like a lot of heavy reputation. They were also known as being one of the most brutals, and they were located in the center of the country, which means they had like they are established nowadays like in Mexico City. How this was seen during these artistic movements, as I told you, every culture, like every group, had their own artistic movements, artistic identity. So we can see in this period of time that they were not movements, but they were like the group of the art. So we can see like the Mayan art was a lot developed, praising like the jaguar. Jaguar was known as one of these figures that gain like a lot of power, that gives you like a lot of power. There are even like some history recordings about how humans that were like warriors or priests literally like made like these metamorphoses because like this powerful belief they have in the jaguar. In the Olmec art, we can see like the representation of the empires in like big stones. That a fun fact about this is like the stone is not found in the area where it was made, so no one knows how they kind of get there into that place. We have like Teotihuacan art, which actually was like built a lot like in drawings, like the red color, for example, represent a lot of the sacrifice and power boost that in that time had. We have the Aztec art, and most important thing about like this period of art, like this movement art, is like most of them had like religious motifs, or there were like literally for this identity, like to praise one powerful figure that most of the time was polytheistic, which means that it was like focused to a bunch of theological representation, not just one, that it was going to change during the Spanish conquering. As an international event, we can see like the equivalent of an Olmec culture in the Mesopotamian. The Mesopotamian, it was like one of the cultures in the worldwide known as started to the development of writing in Mesopotamian, like the invention of the wheel in Mesopotamia. They are known for a lot of inventions that had like an impact in later civilization, as well as Olmec had in later civilizations in America, as we know nowadays. How did this season or era end? With the Spanish conquering? The Spanish conquering, it is important to know that it was not just planned by the Spanish. Literally, they had help of other indigenous groups that were having like some resentimiento against like the Aztecs, who had like a lot of power. So I read like in my investigations that just 1% of this army that conquered during this time the Aztec Empire was formed by Spanish, but the rest was formed by other indigenous groups. When this failed, this season started to become a lot, not just in a political repression, because like it was a political change, but in a cultural change, in a change of belief, in a change of raising, in a change of praying or believing in a God, in a change of how you dress. So it started to establish like a lot the mix of identity as we know nowadays, like the Mexican culture, because it was a mix of a pre-Hispanic culture of our roots that, in my opinion, the pre-Hispanic era of our lives in Mexican identity, it's key for who we are today. Now we can see, for example, in this yellow color, one of the most important movements was the evangelization, that it was literally like the spiritual conquest, when all these beliefs start to change and it started to be represented a lot in art. Art was focused in religion motives in order to educate like the new, in order to educate the indigenous people to get to meet God, to get to know like this important of Catholicism or church nowadays, and why that they were doing it was wrong. Like, for example, in this area, we know, or we also know a lot about like the Inquisition, which literally like punished everything that was considered sins according with the Bible. And one of the sins, for example, was like the consumption of drugs. And nowadays, consumption of drugs or these rituals are very kind of canceled in our culture, because most of the regenerations of we are raised knowing that that's bad. When in the past, for example, there were a lot of these rituals that consider peyote, ayahuasca, or this kind of like drugs, natural drugs that will make or connect you with another god or with your spiritual connection, blah, blah, blah. Nowadays, we still settle like a lot in these religious, not religious, but in this cultural concept that drugs is something very negative. So that's very important, something to know there about like Mexican culture. But here we can see that there were even conventos or places where they were established, where indigenous people that already kind of make art in the past, they were started to make art for the present, like to kind of let know people that this was something they have to be educated about it. So the Spanish architecture was also super influenced, because all the pyramids, all the civilization as we knew was demolished. It is known that the stones with what they built, like the churches nowadays that we can see, for example, in the Zócalo of Mexico City, they were built like with the stones of the pyramids. So all identity start to lose there, and it start to kind of be transformed. One of the most important mix I can see here is, for example, the Virgen de Guadalupe, that it was created by an indigenous people, but it represents like this new belief in this Catholic Church. What is important about here is like we can see that this figure nowadays in Mexico, it's one of the most powerful and identity figures in our Mexican culture. Even though, for example, I'm not Catholic, but even though I'm not Catholic, I know the figure, and if I will see it outside, outside my country, I would literally think about Mexico immediately. So here, this art for me, it represents like a lot of the mix about like these indigenous people see themselves represent in this new religion, because the Virgen de Guadalupe is supposed to be like like brownish skin representation about to make like this identification with the new people that they were trying to make like these identifications with the new culture. Also here we can see like people were asking about their lands, they were reclaiming about their lands. So for example, this codex of Coajimalca, it literally record all their paintings where indigenous people reclaiming the lands, exactly here of Coajimalpa. We can see Real Academia de Carlos, that it was another place where people learn about these religions, about this new society through art. And one of the most important things, I think it was for our Mexican flourishment again, it was to have like un retrato, like a picture of indigenous people, because here it have already happened like around 200 years. So people of the actual civilization actually didn't knew how it looked the past, like the ancestors of our Mexican identity. So there start to flourish like a lot of these identity representations in our countries of as Moctezuma or other Tlatoanis. There were paintings of history of how this conquering was. And of course, there was painting for teach religion to these new persons, right? During this time, also there was a lot of commerce through continent to continent. So the invention of the astrolabe aiding navigation at the sea was a key, because, for example, Spanish colonialism was very strong, not just in Mexico, but all around, not just in America, but also in Asia. They even have like this impact of multi-ethnicism in art that we can see here, because they were bringing like a lot of influence from all around the world. So Spanish culture was like a very, very powerful army by the time. And we can see that represent nowadays in the influence that we have in all Latin America, because we speak the same language, and somehow we have like the same influence of conquering that in the past or in our ancestor have. Also, how this began, it was like with the Christopher Columbus reaches America. It was the beginning of the colonialism. And how did it end? There started to be like a lot of inconformismo, like a lot of disagreements between the actual society, where because there was a lot of inequalities about which was your status and according of what. Most of the time, the people with most status was the one that was fully Spanish, but the people that was, for example, having parents of like Spanish parents and but were born in Mexico, they didn't have like the same perks. So this is start to be like a very concerning spot, because literally this start to raise a lot of disagreements and start to bring like riots, or starting to bring like these indigenous rebellions that it's most like they start to be like the castas, like these groups that were created like with the mix of different razas, um different groups that were having like classification according to their status they will have and the power they will have, which will lead us to a lot of discomfort that will finish with the independence of Mexico that we can see in another timeline. So basically, Mexican identity start to be built like that. Uh, Nowadays, what I can see in the identity of Mexico is like we have like a very, very cool mix between what we know as religion, as how we identify us as a Mexican culture. For example, parties like bautismos, marriages, quinceañeras, they literally have an influence, a total influence by the church, which is like a Spanish influence, but it has been built just for Mexican, like these kind of traditions. Also, for example, las posadas, we have a lot of festivities that represent traditions, but also a mix of our culture. And the best representation of this, for example, is the Day of the Dead, that it represents how we can reach people of the other world, that it had like an ancestral feeling, because people, if like in the pre-Hispanic area used to do that, but also like with this symbolism of between heaven, of purgatorio, or how you connect like with the candles or the skulls. So for me, this like the most influence of Mexican identity through the time is through the parties or the celebration nowadays we have, and also putting as a visual representation the Virgen of the Guadalupe. This was my explanation for these two periods. So see you in the next ones. Thank you.